Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final day of the Spaces virtual conference on the theme of Net Zero Carbon Climate Emergency 2021. My name is Jackie Lowe, and I am the current Spaces President and your chair for this webinar. Before commencing with my introduction of our speakers today, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our 5 sponsors: Atkins, Faithful and Gould, IES, NPS Group, and Wilmot Dixon for their support during the past 2 weeks. All the webinars over this 2-week period have been recorded and are being uploaded to the Spaces YouTube channel. Delegates and Spaces members will be sent a link at the end of the conference to access those recordings. Those recordings are only available to delegates and Spaces members. If you've got any questions, please include them in the chat box to the right here, and we will try and answer them towards the end of this particular session. This morning's final webinar is our Young Visionaries closing session and will be presented by our 3 finalists from the Young Visionary Awards 2019, Matt Smith, Ali Ratcliffe and Guy Schmidt. This session covers their take on the virtual conference, the work they are doing and what they think needs to happen to reach the target of net zero carbon. Now, first up is Matt Smith, our 2019 Young Visionaries winner. Matt is Principal Building Surveyor and BIM Manager at Concertus Design Property Consultants Limited. Matt, welcome and thank you for supporting the Spaces conference.
No problem. Thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me along today. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along to our closing presentation this morning. Hopefully, collectively, there should be a good mix of information for you all and hopefully it's nice and engaging. So my part of our collective presentation is to run through the following. So I have short snippets relating to a summary of the fortnight as a delegate, as a building surveyor, as a BIM manager and as a designer. As a delegate, I'd like to run through a short summary of the presentations I've watched so far over the last fortnight. I do intend on catching up on all of them. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance yet to watch them all. But then I would also like to highlight a couple of presentations that have been of particular interest. A short presentation around my role as building surveyor, as BIM manager, and then first and foremost as a designer. So as a delegate, so I've not obviously yet had the pleasure of watching all the presentations, but I've been able to watch around half of them so far. And the ones that I have been able to watch are listed on the screen here. And I just really wanted to give a quick overview of some that I have had a particular interest in the hope that maybe it will encourage you to go and watch them as well if you haven't yet had a chance. So the first one I really wanted to talk about was Decarbonizing Education by Helen and John Ridgett. Given that education is an area in which I've been fortunate to develop my knowledge and continue to be involved in at Concertus, I found this particularly interesting. The need to make spaces and environments appealing to learning and to encourage students to take a sense of ownership becomes more apparent, particularly with the differing educational needs that are required to create more inclusivity across existing and new educational building stock. Education buildings have always been driven as needing to provide comfortable learning environments. The performance of the buildings has always been at the forefront, and steps have always been taken historically to try and ensure that new educational projects particularly meet the DFE output specifications. The updates to the DFE output specification presented by Helen will be key to helping meet the net carbon zero requirement, particularly for these new buildings. But as noted by Helen on her presentation, the UK is committed to carbon zero by 2050. To me, it's astounding that 80% of the 2050 stock is already built, and refurbishment is clearly going to be a key part to delivering this alongside the way that new builds are constructed. As Principal Building Surveyor from an architectural technologist background, I'm keen to drive within my team the way we refurbish existing buildings in the right way. Often this is determined by the improvement to building fabric and is typical of the projects myself and my colleagues would deliver. However, typically this will need the surveyors to look and listen to the building in terms of how the space can function. And I think this was presented in a really clear manner by John and would highly recommend watching if you haven't already. Of that presentation, I was particularly interested in the topic presented by John, which was the digital twin visualization of estates. As a little bit of a technological nerd, I'm always keen to drive new technologies and ways of working within the business, and particularly within my team. And this innovative approach to communicating design and the performance of the building really appealed to me. I'm keen to look at ways we can work with our clients to help them manage their existing building stock and ultimately the performance of them. be this through a digital twin or other means, this part of the presentation to me was probably the most interesting. So the next one I really wanted to touch on was the life cycle of net zero carbon buildings by Alistar. So I chose this presentation given my interest in detailing on buildings and understanding the whole life asset cost of a building, particularly given the stock of buildings that we are working on. He gave a clear presentation of all the items highlighted here. At Concertus, I've been able to work on a range of projects, and my colleagues are currently working on a proposed care home with a local authority where passive house standards have influenced the design, particularly their desire to adopt a fabric first approach to the project as part of their net carbon zero deliverables. This is a standard they want to adopt going forward, and it's been exciting to see how this is developing within the office. The way the life cycle of a building will be managed, I feel, needs to be determined at the inception of the project, and a slow uptake in the use of mandating BIM across projects has not helped with this. I think working with the digital information and having engaged, meaningful conversations at the briefing stage of a project can allow all stakeholders to consider the key goals of a project. These can be agreed upon as the key objectives, and the outputs and deliverables required to achieve these can then form part of the briefing documentation. Creating a digital building information model enables those who interact with the building to optimise their actions, and that ultimately results in a greater whole life value for that asset and, for me, the operational performance of the building. For me in this presentation, it was interesting to see the projects that Wilmot Dixon have been working on to deliver to passive house standards and some of the challenges they have faced in terms of technology, and ensuring the lessons learned feedback loops were being managed and communicated to improve delivery on their projects. And that is a big driver for me to make sure that we use that inside Concertus. And finally, the last presentation I wanted to touch on was energy and emissions data drops for REBA plan for use and soft landings. Now, I'm not ashamed to say that some of it went over my head, particularly on the first watch. I've rewatched the presentation since due to the engaging manner in which Roderick presented. A soft landings approach to improve operational outcomes is something that I'm fully on board with, particularly with my BIM Manager hat on. This will enable project stakeholders to look at social values and consider and clear reporting during procurement of operation energy as the design develops. It is always important to learn from experience, and having a clear feedback loop whereby the feedback obtained is actioned on future projects is sometimes not always successful. So this is something that we're obviously driving in Concertus, as I mentioned, and is forming part of our BIM protocols. I think for me, the most interesting point was how we monitor the performance of the building post-delivery of a project. Roderick highlighted this is often a lack of attention to energy loads and modelling after REBA Stage 4, with data exchange points that are not clearly defined, particularly in relation to BIM Level 2. Projects are often considered with planning and building control requirements, but post-completion there's no performance monitoring required by statute, and this obviously creates a performance gap in the knowledge of how a building actually works. And to me, this should form part of the FM of the building and ties nicely with the BIM deliverables of a project. So, as a building surveyor, when I was asked to present as one of the closing presenters, I had several ideas about what I wanted to present and how I could approach it. But to me, I felt that this was probably the most useful way to split my presentation. And one of my roles is as a Principal Building Surveyor at Concertus. So what is a building surveyor? Well, building surveyors are involved in design, construction, and often management of real estate assets. So my background as a chartered architectural technologist with a strong professional interest in BIM ties into this nicely. The projects that we deliver in our team range from new buildings to refurbishment projects and delivering programme of works for capital maintenance projects. Our responsibilities as surveyors are to challenge the maintenance programmes to ensure that works undertaken are delivering the best performance for the existing building stock, to challenge and listen to the requirements of the building users, to understand how the improvement works will have a significant impact on the performance of the building. Window replacements play a large part in this improvement. However, without reviewing the building as a whole, there is likely to be a disparity in the overall performance. Going forward, we'll be working with Suffolk County Council to move to air source heat pumps as part of their aim to meet net carbon zero. A fabric first approach is likely to be our starting point to building design and will involve maximising the performance of the components and materials that make up the building fabric itself, before considering the use of mechanical or electrical building services systems using the thermal mass of the building fabric. As building surveyors, we work with other disciplines regularly to collaboratively deliver projects, and I would imagine our role will become involved with looking at whole life carbon assessments, undertaking surveys with our engineers and reviewing this information within our QS team, particularly given the guidance provided by a number of chartered bodies, with the UK GBC document at the forefront of my thoughts. The approach used to reduce energy demand and consumption will vary between buildings depending on its characteristics. And as surveyors, particularly given that we are involved at early inception stages, should be highlighting these considerations to our clients and ensuring that they realise the real benefits that they bring. These are examples I've taken from the UK GBC document. So things such as building fabric and passive design, systems efficiency, energy management, and then further considerations such as the physical well-being of building occupants alongside energy reduction. To me as well, I would also recommend the implementation of digitising their estates, creating this digital twin, for want of a better term, of their estate so that they can better manage its performance. So, as a BIM manager, as BIM manager at Concertus, I've been able to be involved in the development and implementation of new technologies, while working with colleagues to look at ways to overcome challenges in moving project design towards meeting net carbon zero. REBA plan of work in Passive House. So part of the communications that we've had within the business relates to this. So the Passive House standard is an approach that a local authority we're working with, as discussed earlier, wants to adopt as a typical approach to their new developed care home schemes. The challenge for me is the relationship between the REBA plan of work and the information development as part of a Passive House project. There are a number of key information exchanges that need to occur that fall outside of the traditional REBA stages. And this can be difficult to communicate to the project budget holders, particularly when they're using the REBA plan of work as the base point for understanding the deliverables at each stage of a project. And we try and understand how we can incorporate this into our BIM processes and ensure that these requirements are communicated as part of the BIM execution plans. As part of these processes, the communication between the BIM model and the performance modelling software still does not appear to work in the most efficient manner. The IFC format, Industry Foundation class, while a fantastic format that allows a successful collaboration between different design software, does not always communicate the requirements needed for TAS or IES, for example, or even PHP software, with modelers choosing to remodel based upon 2D drawings. A process that successfully delivers a model each time to avoid the element of repetition, which is naturally generating waste as part of the design process, and also to ensure that communication is not one-way traffic with the designers, feeding information into this software to ensure that design meets building regs approval, but rather to ensure that we are challenging the design and programming regular communication, just as we would with design team meetings or BIM coordination meetings. We're trying to understand how we can incorporate this, and this is something that I'm working on. Traditionally, net carbon zero has been largely understood to apply only to the building's operational energy use, yet for new commercial building completed to current standards, emissions from operational energy account for typically just 40 to 50% of its total lifetime. Together, operational embodied emissions over a building's entire lifetime, and any definition of net zero should reflect this complete picture. As the BIM manager at Concertus, and seeing how the DFE BIM employers requirements are written, I question whether these are fit for purpose and whether there is unnecessary data being requested on projects, and whether this time would be better spent looking at modelling operational energy of the building with clear information exchanges to communicate the effect that they have. A requirement to measure performance post-completion would be an appropriate way to ensure that late specification changes do not have a detrimental effect on the aimed building performance, and ensure that, along with the data drops already defined, that the consideration to operational energy remain at the forefront of everyone's mind. So, finally, as a sort of very short summary, I believe our focus must be on pre-construction activities. These contribute disproportionately to high construction waste and low operating efficiencies. They can lead to late-stage design changes, resulting in significant rework and poor material optimization, procurement and planned reuse, which ultimately lead to uncoordinated design deliverables and can divert from the attention from the initial key aims of the project. There are opportunities for improvement in this area. However, I think there is still a relatively low adoption of new technologies and the lack of information management during the structure's life cycle. Thinking digital is the solution that can align projects and achieve sustainable objectives. The use of software, as described by the presenters over the last fortnight, will play a massive part in helping us to achieve net carbon zero, However, I fear that unless more mandatory compliance for measuring the final performance or using such technologies across the board is implemented, 2050 will approach quicker than we would like. And that for me is the end. But I believe we're going to wait till the very end for questions. And I will pass over to Ali for her presentation.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, we will cover all questions as a group when we get to the end. And just a reminder to anyone who's joining us this morning to add those questions into the chat function to the right of your screen as you're watching it. So thank you, Matt. Really appreciate those thoughts and insights. So second to speak is Ali Ratcliffe, who is one of our 2019 Young Visionaries finalists. Ali is Associate Director for Sustainability working at PIC Everard. Ali, welcome and thank you again for supporting the Spaces Conference.
Thank you, Jackie, for my introduction, and thank you everybody for joining to listen. So the first of the two PIC Everard speakers today, I'm going to talk about less about the technical as my Associate Director role and more about how every little helps. So PIC Everard is a partnership. And as a partnership, we have recently turned a corner in sustainability. I've been with the business nearly 7 years. We've been driving sustainability in that whole time. And many of you will know Jose Hernandez, who's been driving sustainability in our business far longer than that, just over 15 years. But more recently, as with all construction, all sectors, and most of the world, we've seen sustainability increase on the agenda. In the past 18 months or so, our business really has turned a corner. We've set business plans, we've got agreement across the board to aspire and challenge ourselves and be a leader in the field. So in our work, we're driving the next step. We've signed up to the RIBA 2030 Climate Challenge. We're delivery partner for the Better Building Partnerships Design for Performance, and we're embedding the relevant principles of LETI into our major projects. That's not all we're doing. That's a very short bullet point list. I would bore you if I went through the whole list, but we are aspiring to do better in our design delivery and management services. So within the business, we have set ourselves targets to upskill all our employees to understand the details of net zero. That's so they can talk the talk and their next step, walk the walk. That's technical staff, that will be support staff, everybody who represents our business. We have aspiring targets to have the knowledge and share the knowledge, and I'll come on to the reasons why a bit later on. We're the first UK firm to sign up to all 6 disciplines in the Climate and Biodiversity Emergency Declaration, a pretty significant stamp that we are leading and we are across the board in all our design disciplines, equally embracing this next step. So the next level in our partnership is our projects and how we can influence the wider network of our clients, whether they be public sector, private sector, or contractors, one of our main bases. We aspire as project leaders. I am a project leader on a major project, which I've got a little bit of a case study for on the next slide, and that is our setting our standard and leading the way. We have a 7-step process, which it's great to see in the past 2 weeks. All 7 steps have been covered by somebody or numerous people across their different talks. So no new content on this slide, but just shows everything coming together to be delivered by a project. So we guide the client to set their sustainability targets. At the moment, we're still using the philosophy of small steps, realistic steps, and that means talking about budget and what is real, really can be achieved on that scale of project. But to do something, every little small step at that stage helps to drive the sustainability targets and strategy throughout the project. We then go into the more technical design steps, undertaking passive design analysis. Often there are other daylight calculations, thermal modelling that come in to the design at that stage. We then look at reducing embodied carbon using one-click software and helping to aspire to use modern methods of construction and designing for manufacture and assembly. Next one is reduce operational energy demand. We have numerous calculation methodologies, but primarily using TM54, and working to educate our clients in changing their ways within their practices, and maybe educating those that use their buildings on how to actually operate to meet the design. Step 4 is use efficient systems and clean fuels. We're being driven by government policy in the clean fuels section, but efficient systems do sometimes cost more, and we do have to often present a case of why that is important, and that often comes into step 6, the whole life cycle costing. Step 5 is maximise renewable energy and storage. It's been a given on a project for some time now that renewable energy should be an incorporation, but we're now driving hard targets on each project to get maximum benefit. Step 6 is whole life costing. Our QSs have now got extremely good at whole life cycle costing. We can present the arguments in terms of cost and in terms of carbon, and educate the clients and the end users in terms of the carbon. They all usually understand the pounds and the pence, but the quantification of carbon is still something that is not widely used. And then step 7, which I think still needs some work across the board, is carbon offsetting and data disclosure. As we all get better at achieving the results that we aspired to do from the outset, data disclosure will become more readily available. There is a lot of data out there, but it's not yet at that operational, been operational for many years, 3-5 years. That's where the soft landings comes in. We will soon have a lot of data. So that's our project leads step-by-step guide. We're currently the client designer for the first major government-funded net zero carbon operational energy, biodiversity net gain, BREEAM outstanding and soft landings driven project. It's a really exciting opportunity for us as a business. We are 160 resource strong. It is a huge project, and as you can see, it has got huge gains in terms of carbon footprint saving. The graph on your screen shows on the left a current new build of the same estate, which is not many years old. And then we are designing Project X, and we have managed to currently get to 67%. And we will be, through technical design, our IBA stage 4, trying to creep those extra few percent to meet our targets, which were set on viability and feasibility work. There has been a huge amount of work going through testing the different methodologies to ensure that our data is realistic, it is science-based, and therefore can be open and transparent and will be disclosed at the end. So not much information about the project there. It is secure and confidential at the moment, but watch this space. In 2-3 years' time, this will all be disclosed, and hopefully a huge success for a government-funded project. So, as a professional, so projects can have a huge impact. As a professional, you can have an equal impact spread across different projects. So, in my team, we have a philosophy in the sustainability and energy team that we lead by example across the whole business, across all the clients, across our peer group. We are trying to educate and upskill and share knowledge with anybody who crosses our path. Setting relevant and realistic, in our case, sustainability and net zero carbon targets, but there are other targets, obviously, social value, DFMA, all those good things. Guiding delivery teams to widen their knowledge base. So at the start of a project, we have more recently been doing a quick poll. It's been virtual at the moment, but it'd be interesting to see face-to-face how confident people are in their knowledge sets, and get people talking about and understanding who they can go to fill in the gaps in their knowledge. It's amazing how people have their expert knowledge bases, and the minute you open up the conversation of who can learn from others in the room, and you get the people talking what they can learn from each other, and that's just in a professional setting. And continue to challenge mindsets. Goes with asking the question of who knows what, but also discussions on topics, new news, not fake news. We often have a debate about articles in the newspapers and whether we agree or don't agree, and what the science-based philosophy are behind the arguments. So keep the conversations going. So I think often in our business, not our business as a particular, our sector, we're driving towards what construction can do, what the built environment can do, what different disciplines within businesses can do, what different sectors in businesses can do. But we've all got to remember that we are businesses, we are project leaders, we are professionals, but we are also people. And as people, we can group together to make small changes to make a big difference. So we've got to continue to do our own small steps. We don't have, I'm not saying, and I can't remember who it was earlier in the week, said people think sustainability professionals are all hippies. We're not all hippies, and you don't need to be a hippie to make small steps and positive changes. Keep educating yourself, share knowledge, but not fake news. We want science. We don't want opinions. Opinions are good and have a place in the discussion, but they should be based on science. Learn from others. There are lots of knowledgeable people, far more knowledgeable than I, on making the right changes as a person. And I've just put a little snippet there on the right of a book that I've been reading recently, The Sustainable-ish Living Guide. Fantastic book. And Jen Gale also has a podcast, a little hints and tips how you can make small changes that make big differences in your life. And actually, when you start reading it, if you have time, you can actually relate the hints and tips to things you could do in your projects and in your work. Great book. And we should always remember to congratulate ourselves. Every little change is something positive towards protecting our planet for future generations. And a quote that I remember from being a child at school: great things are done by a series of small things done together. And I didn't realise, so I was looking it up last night, that it was actually Vincent van Gogh that said that, which is interesting in itself for the reasons he is famous or not particularly driving change. But a quote to take away from today. Thank you for listening to me, and I will pass over to Jackie to introduce Guy.
Great, thank you, Ali. Really appreciate your thoughts there. And yes, as Ali said, our third and final person to speak is Dr. Guy Schmidt, again, another of our 2019 Young Visionaries finalists. Guy is Head of Compliance and Performance and also works at PIC Everard. Guy, welcome, and thank you again for supporting the Spaces Conference.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and sorry I'm just more of a floating head. The laptop didn't quite work with the link, so now I'm using my tablet, which is a bit far away, but the video is quite large. I'm here today to sort of give my viewpoint on the Carbon Net Zero Challenge and how that relates to sort of my sort of field of expertise around social value. So yes, I will have to lean in each time to change a slide, so apologies for that lovely view. Yeah, as I said, I'm head of compliance, performance, and social value lead at Everard. We're looking at how we deliver projects, how we comply with all the regulations, including the targets around carbon net zero and our commitments that Ali mentioned previously of all the commitments we've signed up to, and also looking at social value. So that's how we actually can generate wider beneficial impacts to the communities we live and work in, as well as the communities for our clients on projects. So the format of this sort of presentation is just going to take you through sort of 3 main slides, looking at the environment and social value, sort of the relation sort of between them, and then looking at sort of the here and now of what the link between social value initiatives and the green agenda, and then just a final slide looking ahead of the potential sort of benefits that could be brought around by the inclusion and impetus of carbon net zero within the social value agenda itself as well. So forward. So the environment and social value. From the generation of social value when it was initially developed, and the environment was one of the key 3 pillars. So it's always been integral to the approach of social value. So the carbon net zero challenge is key, just as key for social value as it is in its own right, and within the green agenda construction playbook. So in general, the principle of social value is about delivering real and meaningful impact to people. And very, very simple examples: if we're reducing levels of carbon emissions, we can be improving energy efficiency, that has a direct impact on people. I saw a very good workshop earlier this week within the conference, the Decarbonizing Education by Helen Grove and John Ridgett from Atkins. And I think that also resonated with me because they spoke in detail around the well-being and human-centered design principles and how they apply that within their work, and also to be able to capture and deliver net zero targets and goals, but also including the people at the center of that and not thinking of them as separate. So that's kind of at the principle also of social value. So how we are including people within the conversation around decarbonizing initiatives and programs. So I thought that was a very good presentation overall. So yeah, it goes hand in hand. It's integral to social value as well as the initiative itself. So looking at sort of the here and now, if we looked at the government's sort of economic strategy, it now includes structural reform to level up opportunities in all parts of the UK, and to transition to an environmentally sustainable and resilient net zero economy. So from my point of view, social value is at the heart of that strategy, combining the 3 pillars of social value of social, economic, and environmental. I think this is sort of a key point of, at least from my point of view, of being able to push the net zero carbon agenda within my social value, sort of with my social value hat on. And there was a very good, another good workshop in the conference earlier this week, which I was able to look through, Carbon Net Zero, Where We Are and What Do We Do by Alex G, NPS Group. And he discussed the kind of strategic property model, the now and what it could be in the future. And I felt that was quite a good sort of discussion around how we change the strategic model to benefit people as well as the environment, and to be able to integrate those strategies all the way down to I think the final one is energy strategy. And I felt that's kind of underpinned by the government's economic strategy there, that has been defined as all 3 of those components combining into one to be able to deliver a transparent and comprehensive strategy going forward to tackle all of the issues that they have. From a social value standpoint, from the sort of 3 or 4 years I've been involved, all the frameworks that I've come across, because environment is a key pillar, there's already established measurements and themes and approaches and objectives built into each of those methodologies and frameworks. For example, National TOMS framework, Social Profit Calculator, the HAT database, and the REBA Social Value Toolkit, Social Return on Investment. All of these approaches include environmental measures such as carbon reduction, education around net zero, circular economy, and I feel that we are in a position where those kinds of measures and objectives can be brought to the fore within this discussion, and the environmental drive that is needed to be able to reach the 2050 targets. We can leverage the already established sort of measures and insights from the framework, as well as push innovation around that to drive positive environmental impact. So I feel that there we've got a way for social value to contribute to the net zero carbon challenge by weighting the social value needs for ourselves, but also with clients as they become more educated within the environmental task of hitting carbon net zero. So that could be a here and now push and drive forward for addressing the need that we have. And the final sort of little look ahead. So this gave a bit of thought about how social value, what's social value's role within driving ahead for carbon net zero. And recently, the social value has been mandated on all central government contracts, approximately worth up to 49 billion a year, with the need to explicitly evaluate social value, up to 10% weighting on within the procurement of those contracts. And from my point of view, if we were looking ahead, if all those government central contracts weight the environmental aspect of social value higher and with more impetus, there's a greater impact of positive social value and environmental impact that we can make from those contracts. And if we take into account how that filters down into local authority strategy and protocols, if that then also manifests in their objectives, moving towards weighting the environmental aspect of social value higher, then there's a greater chance of making even further impact and also driving innovation by the industry. So if we need to meet the client's needs, as Ali said in her presentation, there's sustainability teams in Everard, and I'm sure in all sort of companies are really driving that innovation, and to be able to tap into that, to be able to deliver the client's needs, but also again to budget, etc. That's a compounding good that can be made. Sorry. There was so on that note, there was a good workshop that I also was able to look at throughout the last 2 weeks. This was Life Cycle of Net Carbon Zero Buildings by Alistar Don from Wilmot Dixon. I think that was very relevant to sort of looking ahead on the impact that is needed. He addressed the fact that impact of carbon emissions must be thought of as whole life cycle for the building or project that's being delivered, which is spot on. And the numbers, that typical building lifespan is 60+ years of embodied and operational carbon, and not include, as well as construction carbon that needs to be managed and thought of, and also the types of contribution to meeting the net zero challenge was also quite interesting about that need to be thought of in the future. So looking at, as I say, the embodied carbon, addressing low energy use for buildings, especially across the housing sector as well, low carbon supply of the energy, the carbon balance, being able to remove carbon from the environment as well as reduce the impact of it. And one of the critical ones that came out from that workshop for me as well was measurement and verification. So as Ali mentioned in the presentation, the soft landings data and just data in general around what's good and what initiatives work best for the specific projects and buildings. The more data and transparency and verification that we can have going forward will help inform better and better decisions as we go ahead. And that will provide us with more evidence, as science-based, fact-based evidence to be able to make those decisions off. So yeah, that was a very good workshop. I recommend having a look at those three: life cycle, net carbon, zero buildings, decarbonisation, education, and carbon net zero. Where are we and what we need to do? Those sort of three stood out across this across the conference. So yeah, I think for me that was it's a very high level and quick overview of what social value can integrate and bring to the net carbon zero challenge, and we feel that the UK really has a chance to deliver that investment-led recovery for both the climate action and inequalities. Just a final point on that, I think having the society and people also at the human-centered design, going back to Helen and John's presentation, one of the things we probably need to, well, we always need to include, I think, going forward, is thinking about a just transition. So instead of just going forward with the decarbonisation programs, thinking about how that might impact people and the social costs involved in that as well, just from a social value standpoint, thinking back to sort of the Wales coal mines shut in the 1980s and the social cost that had on local communities. It's a component of going forward that needs to be thought of, I think, from the social value point of view, but also just a program point of view for decarbonisation programs, to be able to take into account the people that are going to be living and working in those communities. As Ali said at the end of her presentation, at the end of the day, we are all people, and that's, I believe, needs to be factored into the conversation at every single step. But yeah, that's the end of my presentation, and I hope that gave you some insight about the link between social value and sustainability and net zero. They're not separate. They're not disparate things. They are, completely lost the word there. They are, they can both go hand in hand and bring positives out of each other. That's what I believe. And by working forward and integrating both of those approaches, we can have a better chance of meeting that carbon net zero target by 2050. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Really good session. Okay, I'm just going to pick up on, there have been a few questions in the chat box as we've been going forward. So there's one here from Philip Jordan around needing to digest things a little further before perhaps even having further questions to just pick up. Greg Keeling, our events director, is going to very kindly answer that one for me. Greg, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Firstly, thank you to Matt, Ali and Guy. That was brilliant. Thank you so much for giving your time up and giving your views on our closing webinar. Yes, Philip, you raised a really interesting point, and it's something that we've been discussing. There's a number of webinars, and Matt kicked it off really by saying Rod Bunn's one was needed a second watch, and I absolutely agree with him. Probably needs 4 or 5 watches for me. and there was some really good stuff. But there's others as well that I think we could have some discussions on. So moving into the autumn, I think we will set up some meetings, Zoom meetings, where we can actually chat and see what all of us are doing in particular areas. One for me was the building safety stuff, which Hal Davies presented, was particularly on my mind, and there's a number of others. So yes, great idea, Philip, and well done, Matt, for being honest. And I'm glad you said that, and we will put that into the programme in autumn. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, just picking up a couple of others. There's a query here from Joe Williams. I'm not sure who, but I will leave it up to which of the speakers may ever want to speak first. At what stage do you start to apply TM54 on a project?
That one's probably aimed at me.
There we go. I'll go with you then, Ali.
That's all right. Depending on the size and scale of the project, we'd start to do the data analysis support TM54 in early stage 3. There are occasions when we do some TM54 analysis at stage 2, depending on the procurement route and how much certainty the client or the end user wants at that point in time. But certainly as soon as possible, no later than the end of RIBA stage 3, that is.
Great, thanks, Ali. And also one other further question from Philip Jordan. What percentage of your work is retrofit? Again, well, Ali, I'm going to start with yourself and then I'll probably dip into Guy.
I must admit we had more retrofits pre-COVID than we do at the moment. COVID seems to have stalled retrofit clients in our business at the moment, but I think that's because they didn't know what the certainty of what they were retrofitting to, quite rightly. Probably commercial spaces will no longer be commercial, they might retrofit to residential. So hopefully we'll see a pickup in retrofit and that percentage increase. Currently, I'd say it's probably down to 3 to 5% of our current workload, but I would expect it to increase up into 2025 and beyond in the next 12 to 24 months.
Great, thanks, Ali. Matt, just sort of bringing yourself in there, do you have any thoughts on that particular question?
Well, for myself and for my building surveying colleagues and things, we're doing a lot of like replacement work. So we're doing a lot of things to sort of building fabric, such as window replacement, roof upgrades. It might be insulation upgrades to walls. So we primarily, for the building surveying team, tends to be our sort of bread and butter really for our work and things. So there's a hell of a lot of that. So that, yeah, there is quite a large portion of our work relates to that, particularly on sort of existing educational buildings, which obviously are trying to get up to meeting this standard. So there's quite a lot for us.
Great, thanks, Matt. Guy, have you got anything that you might want to add there, or have we covered it already?
I think Ali's covered that quite well on the stats.
No, that's fine. Okay, Ali, you are very popular today. I've got another question here from Steve Rufus, our Vice President of Spaces. Morning, Steve. Ali, at the early stages of design, you mentioned the importance of modelling passive design. Do you use any simple tools at this stage as opposed to DSM?
Again, that depends on the scale of the project. We have some, many different tools. Our usual go-to is IES, where we model spaces at the very early stages, and then we might put the spaces together to provide a whole building model. That might also be converted into Revit or visuals for whatever purpose we might need it. We do have some simple Excel tools we can use for the mathematics behind passive design calculations, looking at U values, etc. I think they're our main two tools, Excel and IES. Nothing fancy, reliable tools.
Sometimes reliability is what we need, isn't it, at times? Okay, thanks, Ali. And there is just one more question from Joe Williams. Matt, what are your thoughts on the longevity of BIM models post-completion? I worry that we hope BIM and digital twins will solve many problems, but also worry that we won't be able to open them in 5 years, let alone 10 or 20.
I think that's a very good question. In terms of sort of being able to utilise the models, I would hope that the way that the IFC format has been developed and continues to be developed is that in the future they'll still be able to be opened. I actually experimented with opening an IFC model in a much older version of the software we used to see how it worked from 2012, and it opened reasonably well considering it wasn't designed for that purpose in that stage. So I think we'll still be able to open them. I think the only concern is that potentially the data that we apply to them now, there might not be quite so much relevant data that we need for the models in 10 to 20 years. So there might be a case of some work to go back over some of the existing models that are available to go through and input any additional calculations or data relating to that to actually make them fit for purpose for what they need to be in 10 to 20 years time.
Fair enough. Guy, have you got anything you want to sort of pick up on that point as well?
I'm afraid I don't actually use BIM that much, so that would probably be more on if Ali has any experience with BIM.
It made me chuckle, the question about can we open it? Will we be able to open it? As we often have version issues of will it open, will it break? I think it was just a very valid question.
Fair enough. Apologies. I've now got my cat that's joined me for the webinar this morning. It's raining outside, so I'll get a towel in a minute. There we go. Right. So I think that's the end of our questions for now. I can't see any more. So in which case, what I will do is just take this opportunity to once again thank our speakers, Matt Smith, Ali Ratcliffe and Guy Schmidt, and also our sponsors as well. I've got a small presentation on that one coming through in a moment. Just one quick question for everyone who's on the call. If you could just take a few seconds and answer the feedback question that's just appeared on the screen, just on the scale of 1 being poor and 5 being excellent, how you would rate this webinar. That will really help us to learn lessons and move on and improve these sessions moving forward. Okay, so seeing as this is our final session from a 2-week conference, and that has definitely gone on much longer than our normal study day, I've got a particular presentation just to run through here at the end of the session, which Fiona is very kindly operating for me. So once again, just wanted to take a big opportunity to thank our sponsors, Atkins, Faithful and Gould, IES, NPS Group and Wilmot Dixon. Their support's been really valuable over the past 2 weeks, and without them we wouldn't have been able to do some of the technology-based items that we've been able to do or cover some of the sessions as well. So we really appreciate your support in our study day and new format study day for this year as well. Next, looking at our presenters, I've got a number to go through here, so just bear with me as I read through a very, very long list, but we've had some fantastic presenters over the past 2 weeks. We've had Professor Alan Jones, the President of the RABA. We've had Alistar Don, Head of Building Performance Group, Sustainability at Wilmot Dixon. Alex G, Operations Director at NPS Group. Ali, of course, from PIC Everard, we've just heard from. Annabelle Clark, Associate Director, Sustainability Specialist at Faithful and Gould. Dorian O'Neill, Business Development Consultant at Norse Group. Guy, thank you again for your presentation this morning. Dr. Joe Jack Williams, Associate Researcher at Field and Clebb Bradley Studios. Helen Groves, Director at Atkins. Dr. Hill Davis, Technical Director at Sibsey. John Ridgett, Associate Director of Atkins. Dr. Jolanta, oh dear, Obsinska, fingers crossed, Leicester City Council. Dr. Laura Mansell-Thomas, Senior Partner at Ingleton Wood. Matthew Smith, thank you, Matt, for your conversation and your presentation earlier this morning. Michael Cross, Head of Partnerships and Innovation Group, Sustainability at Wilmot Dixon. Paul Cockaday, Director, Energy and Carbon at Norse Energy. Peter Dunn, Faithful and Gould. Dr. Roderick Bunn, Building Performance Analyst at WME Boone, Sadaf Askari, ICL Partner Business Manager at IES, Samantha Kennedy, Director, Environment and Climate Action at Essex County Council, Dr. Sean Fitzgerald, Director, Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge University, Stephen Hodder, Principal Director at Hodder & Partners and Chair of the Construction Industry Council, Steve Jackson, Regional Director at Faithful and Gould, and Victoria Hills, Chief Executive of the Royal Town Planning Institute. So I think that's everybody. There we go. So big thank you to all our presenters from the past 2 weeks. And also, without some support, we wouldn't have been able to run the events themselves. So just a big thank you to all the chairs of these sessions. So Alan Jarvie and co, and oh, thank you, Fiona, Alan Jarvie, Alex G, Andrew Rowe, Greg Keeling, Helen Newman. Oh, there's a thank you for myself. That's very nice. Moving on to the next page, Jennifer Jackson, Mark Appleyard, Paul Lynch, Richard Daniels, Richard Davidson and Steve Rufus. Do really appreciate your time over the past 2 weeks to help with our sessions. And then I believe there is another slide. So there are a lot of people that have been working behind the scenes to make sure that this conference happens and is as successful as it can be. So an extra special thank you to Alex G, who has been doing a lot of work to get this set up. Andy Carter from Be Ambitious, he's very much been the tech support in the background on this. And of course, Fiona Fanning and Greg Keeling. Both Fiona and Greg have put an immense amount of time into getting these sessions set up. That time's probably been running over the past 3 or 4 months. And we did have our study day from last year all ready to go before lockdown happened. So contacting people and redirecting people into more of a virtual environment has been quite interesting for everybody, but has taken more time than perhaps we all thought it would. So particularly for Fiona and Greg, thank you very much for your efforts in getting this set up. So that's it. That's the end of our virtual study day conference. Thank you again for watching and attending. The YouTube channel will have all the presentations from the past 2 weeks on it, and we'll be sending those details out shortly to all members and delegates. So I wish you a very pleasant day and weekend, and hopefully we'll get to speak to you all soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.